From the end of the turnings of the pentagram rite till the end of the 5 sets of evening vibrations, I felt a presence with me around my head, but not the same as the aura of my head. From the part of the pentagram rite that is like knighting till now, I feel this throbbing contentment, no pain. But at first, and sometimes in between, there was that shuddery feeling. Some other feelings that occurred were like breezes up through my feet and through me. Not the same way that if one was to go outside and the wind was blowing, that you would feel wind. In the dark mirror was like a sharp point going deep in, and everything was black. And then there was some sort of square thing, and it opened, kind of like some sort of mechanical door, and it moved about, and it was like the sharp entrance was full of concentric shapes. And in the shadows was pink. I mean, the shadows beyond just the shadows, it was like there was more space to the shadows, and there's shadows in places that one doesn't see the shadows here, like around the mirror and some stuff like that. And it seemed like maybe there was writing or symbols or something, but I couldn't quite make it out. There was a light, almost gray blob, perhaps twice the size of this globe here, right there. And from it flowed down only gray all over the floor, and there was a sort of fluttery feeling to touching the floor. Anything that touched the floor had that feeling as this went across it, and it was felt in places that I was not. During the final reading, it was like there was like purple and like Like, there was a thing like that, and there was, like, other stuff that made me think that maybe this was, again, supposed to be some sort of writing or symbols. And that's as far as I can remember of that symbol. And my face blacked out once more, but I didn't really see anything distinct. I can think of chapter 12 much like the tower. And it would have been interesting to see Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and beyond for this book to complete. But the thing that we find in that is that orders change, and they're not, it's the path that goes between the hands. They're not what people think they are. And people are using the people. Like, people tend to be ultra conservative in politics. And so they just go along with their party or whatever. Like nowadays, how liberal and progressive don't even apply to the words. They tend to be, instead of right wing, they tend to be ultra left wing and gearing towards, all this talk about, well, America was never a democracy. That's kind of a misunderstanding. But we return to the theme of these efforts to take away freedom under guises of causes, and how politics in general is used by a completely different group than it claims to serve, and the threat to national or cultural or hereditary based identities, particularly if one is of the sort that used to be the majority of the country. Now, there tends to be the blaming of what's going on, like Christianity and stuff. But when they stepped away from their beliefs and their practices, and they turn to something else, as far as they do that, you really can't blame that faith, now can you? Considering that a person is responsible for their choices and working their fate, perhaps it's best that we don't even know it. And, things have to be overturned. Things need to be built back. Do we know how that's going to be? There's sort of a speculative rending of the whole, the saints thing, but the saints in this book are the philosophers and all that. But one thing that is realized by this point is that you may think that all this is about finding out and working through things that you learn on the outside, but you're obviously learning about yourself. And, the tree of life, before that, central sphere to the whole thing, the sun sphere, it seems to be external, but the way to get through it is the internal work. And above that Well, the trick is to not get lost in the mind and the spirit of it all in terms of your body, because you still got to take care of your body. And I know there's other ways to explain this, but the second story is based around ideas of Judges 3:31 and 5:6. Now, I don't think that censors is the right term, although the Bible did have a lot of editing. I think things were included in the Bible that people may not quite understand the implications of it. But we also need to note that rather than just deities, these names mean something. And so when the name indicates perhaps a goddess, well, did people automatically change the name? And were they better known as that before they joined apart? Now, I don't think deep down any of these prophetic figures believed in a divine masculine, so we don't have to balance it out with a divine feminine. There's actual indication that beyond the so-called warish Jewish veneer, that wasn't the point. It wasn't about the tribe for the covenant. And anybody who heard of the idea of being in covenant through the terms conveyed by prophetic figures, well, these, could take part like that. So some of the issues that people may have kind of balance out. And I've talked again about the whole son and daughter of this, that, and the other. How that's not always literal in mythologies. I don't think that we can say that it's so provable that the using of different names can be narrowed down to particular text, particularly since even the Bible, you can kind of indicate, well, there's different context to it in terms of, that name's used to make a point. So you'd have a generic deity name that's a broader formula and specific formulas that you would use. And of course, certain names tend to be personified and stuff by some cultures, but there was a stepping away from that in a way. I will agree wholeheartedly that some things left out or forgotten could be very useful. Whether myths are about objective reality or whether it's just subjective, sometimes these things are for the purpose of serving humanity, giving individuals opportunities. And the prologue kind of indicates of that. Same thing with the little subtitle about the Valentinians, that, there's the representation of passing down through things and unveiling beyond the secret societies and such themselves. In the first chapter, we have someone who believes, but maybe not in the same way. Shamgar was someone who knew how to talk to people, knew how to enact with people in a society. Someone who was guided by the same principle that he saw his mother as being a pawn, and ideas about his father. Although the Philistines and the Canaanites were not historical per se, they do represent forces or groups of nations and tribes that were combated against by the Israelites. The Israelites were seen as having similar goals as Akhenaten in trying to do away with other cults, seeing what they worshipped as, fulfilling the roles of the others, but perhaps not approaching how to turn others towards unity in the right way. In chapter 3, we have the idea that people, experience their sense of the divine differently and consider different things as if they're messages. There's a difference between being present and having control over, but perhaps it's not, when we're referring to divinity or perhaps other spiritual entities, that there's not the control, it's just people have been given free will, and some people are going to choose perversions and other issues. Just like in chapter 1, chapter 4 indicates that, help was needed. And oh yeah, by the way, the meanings of names make their way into the story in a more obvious way than they do in the Bible, where you don't always have these names translated. I mean, there are names, so you do want to just have the name, but you should have a translation with it to help people get it. Whether of spiritual beings purely or beings that incarnate, you can't expect them to hand over their full trust and knowledge and stuff right away. And some things are related to, some truths are not for everyone, and sometimes that's just about your own personal situation. War and industry are certainly the combined factors of this age. But we do find out that he has, a true father other than, and this relates to certain types of orders that people can be involved with, to have developments